the wealth of renewable energy that Africa has and put a number to that, we would be the richest continent in the world. We have hydropower, we have geothermal. There is no continent that is as rich as Africa in regard to energy. How do we use that as the benefit?
Where our renewable energy and related industries, especially solar panel installation, wind farms, battery techs and maintenance, etc., will create millions of jobs for the African youth population.
Hello and welcome to State of Africa. I'm Jeff Mote, and today we are turning the spotlight on one of the defining issues of our time, Africa's path to clean energy. Now, despite contributing less than 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, Africa is already the most climate vulnerable region in the world, and this is according to the United Nations Environment Programme. But from renewable energy to climate-smart agriculture, the continent is finding African-led solutions that turn climate responsibility into climate opportunity. Now, joining me for this conversation, we have Wangari Muchiri, Director of Africa at the Global Wind Energy Council. We have Alelegn Agegnehu, Assistant Professor of Energy, Climate and Land Law at Bahir Dar University in Ethiopia, and Fatou Jeng, the founder of Clean Earth Gambia. A dynamic panel to unpack what a just transition really means for the continent. Wangari, I want to start with you. When you talk about the Global Wind Energy Council, what is it? What is it doing? What impact does it seek to achieve on the continent? And of course, as we're talking about, around the globe as well?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. And really, it's an honor to be here today. So the Global Wind Energy Council is the industrial association globally for anything wind energy, whether you're developed, whether you're manufacturing turbines, whether you're providing services to wind farms. All these companies are our members, and we're about 2,000, over 2,000 members that are within the GWEC team. And therefore, we are the voice of the industry globally, speaking with one voice to governments, to financiers, to policymakers, to really help them understand wind energy and help them embrace it. And so my role as the Africa Director is to do this within Africa. We've seen that there's a lot of adoption of renewable energy like solar, like hydro, but wind seems to be less understood. And so we've decided to take this very rich membership base and the knowledge that we have and help share and capacity build governments and others across the continent.
Thank you so much for that, Wangari. Quickly, I'll move to you, Fatou. Talking about Clean Earth Gambia, what is the organization doing in the Gambia, and of course the impact it seeks to achieve not only in your country but across the continent as well?
So we are a youth-led environmental NGO. We have over the past years really been able to focus on advocacy, on education, on policy, as well as restoration and nature-based solutions. Over the past years, through our engagements, working with the government of the Gambia and UN institutions like UNICEF, UNFPA, and UNDP, we have been able to actually impact over 40,000 people in the Gambia through our advocacy efforts, and also have planted over 35,000 trees across the country, because Gambia is one of the least developed countries at the crossroad of the environmental crisis. I am from Banjul, the Gambia, which is the capital city, and we are at risk of sea level rise. And over the past days, we partnered with the Banjul City Council to actually plant over 14,000 trees across the Banjul River to actually help in curbing the rise in sea level. We also last year hosted the first ever National Children and Youth Conference on climate change, bringing together children and young people across the country to actually engage our policymakers and also our government to really ensure that our national climate policies and programs are actually youth and children sensitive. And also with our focus on climate justice, we've been empowering young women to actually build their leadership as well as their knowledge on the intersection of gender and climate, and also providing them resources and tools for them to continue to engage their communities and also build their resilience. And we've also worked with farmers, especially women farmers, providing them with skills and knowledge to actually be able to engage in climate sensitive agriculture, as they are also one of the groups that are mainly dependent on the natural environment. So in summary, we have over the past years worked on different thematic areas and have impacted thousands of people across the country. And obviously, our goal is to make sure that we upskill and scale up our work across the continent to make sure that there is more focus on climate justice and our climate advocacy, in our climate implementation, as well as climate adaptation work to ensure that young people are put at the heart of the climate conversations, as well as vulnerable communities that continue to be the most disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis.
Prof, I want to come to you because you're the man in the classroom and you're the one always unpacking these particular concepts to your students, to your learners. I want to start with you, Professor Alelegn. When you talk about a just transition, because I want us to unpack all of these jargon, because that's the first place you start to mainstream the conversation. When you talk about a just transition for Africa in terms of clean energy, Professor Alelegn, what does that mean when you're explaining this to somebody who's not too conversant with, climate terminology when it comes to climate change? How do you explain that to them?
Expanding energy access, because Africa is under energy poverty. This means more than just 600 million people lack electricity. So when we just talk about this just transition, it is the issue of energy access. When we talk about this just transition also, it protects and creates jobs. When we advocate and promote these renewable energy resources, we need to have just create decent jobs for those who were working in fossil fuel factories. So it is all about balancing the issue of creating decent jobs.
The continent is indeed in need of a lot of industrialization. How do we do that and move forward in a climate smart way? Because you can see the gap that's there. And these are the rooms that you're in talking about this. How should the continent think about that particular aspect?
What has really happened in the past is that the energy systems have been very extractive when it comes to Africa. When you think of the oil, big oil companies coming into Africa to take out fossil fuels, to take out coal, it's never been a way to help develop the country. Even if that was the story that we were all told, that this developing your oil will help you develop. And when you look at the countries that have had oil, in fact, it's been more of a curse than really a support in terms of developing their own growth. And so when it comes to this conversation around a just energy transition, we need to ensure that the people who need the energy the most, and 600 million of the people who don't have access to electricity, 600 million of them are in Africa, then we need to ensure that we're giving them the cheapest, best energy that they can have access to, and that is what rare renewables comes in. And so if there is access to energy, let's say somebody has a solar panel on their roof and they're able now to power and light their houses, or they're able to work longer in the market, or they're able to be more productive just as a factor of having energy as an enabler for the commercial activities they want to do, or for anything that they want to do, then that is the development that we're really talking about. So when you come to discussing a transition in Africa, the transition is not from fossil fuels to renewables, but in some cases it's from no energy to renewables. And so ensuring that is really done fairly. Now, coming to your question around industrialization, and when I think of powering the continent for 600 million Africans, it's not going to be enough for us to say, I'm going to buy a panel from China. I'm going to send all my money out to China to acquire a solar panel or a wind turbine or a battery just so that I can have access to electricity. That's not going to work. And it's going to only replicate the same extractive systems that we've seen in the fossil fuel industry, taking money from the least poor and charging them the most just to access energy. What we need to be doing is saying, how can we start to manufacture these technologies within the continent? How do we start to bring industrialization, and dare I call it green industrialization, into the continent and say, let's power industries, let's bring data centers, let's create jobs. And because we have so much abundance in solar and wind and hydro, and then we also have the critical minerals that go into into technologies like batteries, it's a big opportunity to industrialize the right way without it being extractive. It can really be a real path to development for Africa. And I think that's the way we need to start looking at this just and equitable transition.
I want us to move from, where it's discussed in terms of policy and systems that needs to be done, and go to the ground where Fatou is, where she's engaging community in this particular front, not only educating them, but for those who know, giving them the tools needed to actually move forward in terms of practice. When you actually start these conversations, Fatou, where do you start from so that they can understand the import of what they're doing, how important it is to them, and what they need to do moving forward? Because it really needs to start at an individual level, a family level, then community, and get the ripple from there. How do you start this conversation to make it really go home, get to those particular people as well?
For someone like me, at a young age, I saw how the impact of climate change was affecting my family. My father is a farmer, and I saw how the impacts of climate change actually impacted his agricultural yield. And this is the same for many families in the Gambia. Gambia is a country where about 70% of our rural population actually depend on agriculture as their main source of income and livelihood. So for someone like me, I was inspired due to climate impact on my family. And I took individual actions before I even set up Clean Out Gambia. I started being involved in community outreach. When there were beach cleanups, I'll join. When there were school outreach, I'll join. Even though at that age, I didn't understand most of the terminologies, or I didn't understand most of the things that were happening. And so for me, this is the approach that we continue to use in our engagements and in our activities across the Gambia and beyond. Because part of the work that we do is a lot of awareness, because a lot of people see climate impacts, but some of them do not understand that it is climate change that is causing some of these things happening. For instance, on the issue of the heat wave that has been exacerbating over the past years, you will sit with family members and communities and they will complain, oh, it's so hot today, or it's been so hot in the past few days, but they wouldn't attribute this to climate and all. So we realized that advocacy at the individual level, at the community level, at the schools is something that's very crucial. And that's what we've been doing. For example, Gambia is also one of the countries that still do not have environmental education in their basic and elementary school curriculum. So what we do is actually go to these schools to actually more or less provide a supplement to train these young people so they understand what energy transition means to them, what climate justice means to them, etc., while the government makes plans to actually incorporate environmental education in the system. So how do we share, or what do we share? Because some of the panelists, or my co-panelists, have actually mentioned how important just transition is for the continent, and also how urgent it is, because we continue to see how Africa as a continent is actually blessed with so many natural resources, but we still haven't been able to harness these resources that we have. So we need to make sure that at least when we are having conversations, we also bring to these people the opportunities that are there for just transition, or the opportunities that are there for industrialization, because it will create job opportunities for them. They will understand that, and also it will actually help them actually get out of poverty, or lift them out of poverty, and also will help improve their lives and their livelihoods. So sometimes these conversations, when we're having it, if we also narrate it or code it in a way that it also tells them that when we take action, it will also provide economic opportunities for you, it's going to provide health benefits for you, it actually makes them listen more, especially in terms of how we can get more people involved in the just transition, but also in ensuring that they are more involved in terms of accessing opportunities. Because again, I was reading a report from IRENA and the African Development Bank, especially around the renewable energy market analysis that they did for Africa and its region. And it's really shocking to see that we have an estimated, like, if countries actually take action and actually invest more in green jobs or in just transition, it will actually help to accelerate their energy development by like 6.4% in their GDP, and it will also create an overall employment of 3.5% by 2050 for countries in Africa. And also we see how this sector, or the renewable energy sector, could also help to create up to 3.3 million of like direct green jobs in Africa by 2030 if countries are really taking more action and really investing more on it, because there's so much potential for that. We do a lot of work underground to create awareness, to engage all governments, to make sure that there are more policies that are climate sensitive, etc. But also it's really important that we are communicating to these people about the opportunities that are available and really what they could get from our transition to a more just economy, to more just societies, as well as to just more equitable societies in this transition as well.
Thanks so much for that, Fatou, because there's a key point you've raised there. And I want to go to Prof on this as well, because Prof Alelegn, you're dealing with research, you're dealing with data in terms of what we're looking at right now. And what's the data saying? What's the research pointing to in terms of this particular transition to clean energy? Is it looking at it in terms of it being a threat to economic livelihoods, or is it showing the opportunity as well that could be found therein for it to have a more significant uptake by various individuals, companies, organizations across the continent? What's the data pointing to at this particular point?
The problem is when we come to just practically the government as well as the people themselves have no any still awareness regarding this issue. When the government simply crafts or develops this policy, so there is a gap between what we are saying in a conceptual aspect and in a practical issue.
I'll be coming to Wangari in a bit, just talking about policy and that. But quickly, I want to jump to Fatou very quickly to give a rejoinder on this in terms of that particular gap of awareness, because that's something you're actively working on. That's the core mandate of your organization as well. How do you deal with that? Give us some practical steps in order to close this particular awareness gap that has worked, and insights that other people can use as well in that space.
The government can't do it alone. NGOs can't do it alone. The private sector can't do it alone. Funders can't do it alone. So it's a collective effort. It's a collective responsibility. And as an NGO, especially working with local communities, we do our best to make sure that we're helping to bridge the gap, ensuring that communities are actively involved and engaged about what's happening, but also helping to empower them, to train them so they know how they can actually upskill themselves and access opportunities in this sector. So one of the things that we actually do is to, for example, in July, 2 months ago, we actually conducted a national training of trainers. So with that, we brought together schools, especially teacher coordinators of the eco clubs that we actually set up, because we went across the country to set up eco clubs where we can actually help these children, especially in the lower level, to help them get involved in climate related issues at a young age, and then help them actually select executive members to now help them also build their leadership, so they can also go to their communities and their families to also amplify the messages that we've actually shared with them. So we assign teacher coordinators in these eco clubs that would actually help to coordinate these activities. But what we did with the national training of trainers was to bring all these teacher coordinators across the region in the Gambia, and also identified community leaders, also identified educators beyond those that are in schools, actually also in the informal educational sector, and brought them all together. So there we were able to really provide resources, but also build their knowledge on key thematic issues like energy transition, waste management, etc. Because we understand the value of how these knowledges amplified could be in the communities, because we can't be in every community in the Gambia. We can't be in every school in the Gambia. So we use these teachers and educators and community leaders to really upskill them and provide the resources, and then they go back to their schools, they go back to their communities and help us amplify. And what is important here is the sustainability aspect of this kind of educational or this kind of capacity building that we do, because then there is sustainability in that regard, because then these teachers will also educate their students, they will educate other people, and then the trend continues, and then it helps us to really be able to build lasting knowledge and lasting impact in terms of the work that we do. The other thing that we also do is also the training of also activists in the Gambia, and also policymakers and also enforcement officers, etc. Of recent as well, last month in July again, we also we brought together policymakers like the police, the immigration, the alcalos, the women CAFO leaders, etc. And then also had continuous engagements with them around relevant climate policies and also how we can actively use these people, the knowledge, the traditional knowledge that they've built over the years, but also the existing networks that they have, as well as the resources that they have within them to also help us in amplifying. So for us, most of the thing that we do is bring in educators and bring in people that have strong connection in their communities and have built trust and have built relationship with their community members to always help us in amplifying the messages that we continue to share beyond the work that we do in these communities, because we believe in the spirit of community-led action, and we also believe in the spirit of building trust with these communities. Because at the end of the day, for example, if we implement programs, give an example to the tree plantings that we do. So at the end of the day, if we don't build trust with these communities, for example, we go there, we plant trees, but without engaging these communities, it might not become a success because we can't go there every time. But when we build trust and ensure that there is ownership in these engagements that we do, it really helps us in building longevity, but also sustainability in not only the awareness work that we do, but also in the conservation work that we do, and even in pushing for more policy changes as well in communities, because these community members understand us and they want to work with us, and they also want to make sure that what we do is them, the community, taking ownership, because they understand how it will help them to build their resilience, to also build their adaptation capacities, but also other opportunities that will come along the way.
Thank you so much for that, Fatou. And I mean, very many gems for us to, take notes on what we can do in our own spaces as we move this forward and close that particular awareness gap. Wangari, bouncing to you now, and I want us to talk a bit about policy, because we're looking at a continent that is, as you had said, resource rich. There's nothing that is needed on a resource front, natural resource front, that we don't have. A huge demographic dividend as well. When you look at policy and the continent's posture, towards policy and moving towards this particular transition, are we moving fast enough? Are we seeing the fruits that could be reaped out of this? What's your take so far on, Africa where it is and how it should be moving from a policy level?
I think that's a great question, Jeff. And I just also to contribute to what Fatou was saying, I think she's absolutely right that the community really help protect the assets and really help enable these projects to be successful. I wanted to tell a little bit of a story before coming to answer your question. But there's a wind farm in Kenya called Kipeto Wind Farm, and Kipeto Wind Farm is very many Maasai landowners who have now given their land for this wind farm, but still live within the same community. And the people who have turbines on their land, when the turbine does not turn, they call the central office and say, the turbine is not turning, it's not working. Somebody needs to come in and fix it, right? Because they know that when the turbine's not turning, money is not being made. So the community really helps protect the assets, helps ensure the projects are successful. And I think that's really why it's really important, the work that Fatou has just spoken about that she's doing in the Gambia. Now, coming to the question that you asked around policy and, I've been in the industry, let's say, 17 years and working in renewables from when renewables was, nobody knew what it was. You heard about solar, in 2008 here and there, but it wasn't really as mainstream as it is now. And working in different regions where, in Africa, in Australia, in Europe, and seeing that policy has really catalyzed the renewable sector that we see now. To give you an idea, at the point where I first started in the sector, solar was 10 times the price. The reason this has come down so far is because policy has enabled the price of this to go down. And therefore, it's easier now to adopt through everybody, or for everyone to adopt, because it's much cheaper. But this is also all a factor of policy. In addition to that, when you have policies that are long-term, clear, they don't have any changes, you see a lot of trust come into those communities and a lot of trust come into those countries. And what happens is then the investment dollars follow, right? And the financing of projects comes into the country. So I'll give an idea. There's in South Africa, which is the most successful wind market on the continent, there's been a very long-term procurement program that's for procuring renewable energy. And it's been quite successful because it has enabled them to really develop their wind and solar assets in country. because it's been clear through each bid window that they're going to take a certain amount of wind and solar. This is how it's going to be deployed. It's all black. It's all on paper, black and white, right? So there's nothing that really investors have to worry about. Where you see policy is not very, as I like to call it, vanilla, easy to predict, very straightforward. Investors don't like that. So what happens is, and that's many markets in Africa, what happens is they don't invest. So Africa right now only gets 2% of all global financing for renewable energy. 2% when we have 60% of the world's best resource is really, really disappointing. And so we need to use policy to really catalyze the investment, to catalyze these projects to be able to thrive, to use that to also talk to communities, to talk to different stakeholders who will enable the success of these projects. And I think some of the work that we do, in advocating for policy to be really robust, but also ambitious and clear and strong and vanilla as well, as I like to say, is really, really important, because that enables the market and the environment with which investment happens.
Prof, I'm coming to you because even as you talk about this, narratives play a huge component in terms of adoption by community, investment, by certain, actors in that particular space as well. And I want us to look at, the place of narratives in all of this, because you're in that particular space, even in academia, as we shape these particular narratives. How important is it for Africa to actually own this particular narrative on climate and shape it internally as a continent vis-a-vis having it shaped externally? And how can we do more of that, Prof? Because that really will drive the messaging home. How can we do that?
Is it really African Union, integrating or collaborating with member states for the sake of just bringing this just transition? So I was trying to just review some of the strategies done at union level. Even this African Union climate strategy is not binding within member states still. So what has to be done first is introducing or establishing a binding strategy which bounds all member states with regard to just transition. In addition to that, there is emission trading system at European level. But in Africa, there is no any binding legal system which obliges the member states to cut their own emission, even if this climate change is a global challenge.
Thank you so much. I want us to take a short break at this particular point in time. We're speaking about narratives. Prof, you took it further and spoke to the fact that even beyond that, we need a binding strategy and legal systems as a continent so as to be able to move forward, in unison to achieve a common goal. I believe that's a fitting point to take our break on the show. We take a short break. We are back on the other side with more. This is State of Africa. Don't go too far.
Yeah, definitely there's drastic change in climate. Our dry seasons are much longer, and the places where we're experiencing wet seasons, the wet seasons are also longer. So it was a bit confusing, and it also messed up the harvesting periods of the farmers. And also when I came to this other side in Nairobi, a predominantly cold area, we could see we experienced a long period of cold and dusty seasons in a time when we are supposed to be experiencing rainy seasons.
I've been in Nairobi for a while, and for the past 2 months, I can say it was like a cold climate, and it was also a time or a period whereby the last 1 month, the kids were at home, and it was okay. But now it's kind of hot, and due to that global change or the climate change.
Welcome back to State of Africa. Now, before the break, we set the stage with the scale of Africa's climate challenge. Now, let's dive deeper with our panelists. What practical steps are governments, investors, and communities taking today to build more resilient economies? Whether through wind corridors, green industrial zones, or grassroots climate action, Let's continue that particular conversation as I get back to my panel this particular episode. And let's pick it from where we left off, and quickly want to get to you, Fatou, on this, because as we talk about solutions and how we can move forward, it's a critical part of the conversation to see what we can do at whatever level we are of society, organization. And I want to talk about climate smart agriculture, because indeed it's also a very key component when it comes to not only food security, but also this particular transition. How can women and youth farmers be placed at the center of these transition, not being brought in, marginally, to be part of the conversation at the periphery, but really driving this change and transition from the center? What would you say about that? How do we make this happen practically?
How do we put women, young people at the center of this transition? For me, what I always say is, first of all, it's just about the political will. It's about how governments are actually really very much interested in putting in policies that actually address the challenges of these groups, but also how much the government is willing, or our governments are willing, to invest to support these groups of people and communities. And I recently did a lecture at the European Alba Forum. Let our governments actually provide resources to women farmers. Africa is a continent where we still have a huge proportional number of women farmers still without access to land, because of the patriarchal society and because of the laws that makes it difficult for these women to actually access resources the same as other community members. In 2021, we actually led a really big campaign, because women farmers in Gunjur were actually at the risk of losing the farmlands that they were using for over 30 years. And the proceeds of their activities were what they were using to send their children to school, to actually build their lives and also their livelihoods. And it was really unfortunate, because when we heard about this situation from the young people in Gunjur, we had to actually use our social media platforms and brought to the attention of people, especially the media, policymakers, etc., about what was happening to these women farmers. Because these women at the beginning were not talking about what was happening, because they were scared of the impact or the repercussion of what would happen if they speak or talk about the challenges. And funnily, these farmlands were actually being taken by a corporation that actually wanted to extend or expand their activities. This corporation was already damaging the environment through overfishing and also through pollution, affecting our river and the resources we had in the river, and then now wanted to go further and actually expand their land size so that they can continue the exploitation on our environment. So with that, we had to go all out, and we did a massive campaign. And this was really able to get the attention of different stakeholders. And at the end of the day, with the support of lawyers, etc., these women were actually able to maintain their farmlands. So how do we make sure things like this do not happen again, where women actually continue to be at risk of losing their lands, or even some women do not have access to land? The second thing also, for young people that have been in this space, we continue to see how there are so many challenges in terms of the low participation and representation of women in decision-making processes. And as a young person that has been a decision maker, that has served or that serves as a negotiator for the government of the Gambia on ACE, that is Action for Climate Empowerment and Gender, to the UNFCCC, I've seen how important it is for young people to be in spaces like this, because we get to bring our first-hand experiences and our first-hand knowledge in spaces like this, which can actually influence not only policies but also implementation.
Wangari, I want to come to you as well, speaking to this, and let's move slightly away from wind energy, your forte, and talk a bit about climate smart agriculture in this particular space, because even as you look at this, there's a huge evolution, rapid evolution of tech that's going on. We're talking about AI, we're talking about drones and data and how we can use this. How can the continent actually use this particular rapid evolution happening in tech to have a more resilient agriculture sector on the continent? How should we do this so that we can move a bit faster and leapfrog some of these gaps as well?
when you look at what's happened with other innovation, let's say in the fintech space in Africa, you give access to the technology to, let's say, many people, and the innovation that comes back, the way that they apply this innovation or this technology, there's even ways that the people who created the technology themselves would not even have thought. And I, when I speak of things like M-Pesa in Kenya, which really revolutionized how we do banking in Kenya and across the continent. So I think when we're now seeing this transition, the AI revolution, being able to use drones for irrigation, being able to have data on whether there's going to be a drought, whether there's going to be a flood within the agricultural space, I think it's very, very exciting. And I've seen interesting models that are now being put in place where if I have a solar farm that helps me irrigate my farm, but let's say I have excess energy, I can now use that to mine blockchain. What does that do? That now gives the farmer a secondary source of income that then enables them to cushion themselves against any challenges that they might have, let's say, with the agriculture. In addition to that, when they now have excess funding, they're able to innovate more, they're able to bring in more technology onto the farms to produce more and to have more output. And then we also start to see value addition come into play. So whether if you grow tomatoes, can you now grow tomato paste? Can you now create the tomato paste? If you now, if you grow a certain product, can you dry it and sell it? And so there's a lot more now that is happening within the sector as we bring in technology, as we bring in energy that is enabling all this technology. I think this is really the real opportunity. And I think initially the saving grace really for Africa, and I think for a long time, it used to be looked at like we've been left behind. But actually, we're not stuck with legacy systems that we now have to unpack. We actually can start from scratch and just go, right, with this new technology. It's the same thing that happened in banking. When everybody was trying to figure out how to get everybody a bank account and, the clunky technology or everybody a landline, and now Africans have moved on straight into mobile phones, mobile banking. I don't even need a bank to operate and send money across the country. Then we can move much faster. We can adopt technology quicker. We can shift. We can change. We can, and I think that is really the exciting opportunity for us, rather than trying to say, how do we follow how traditional agriculture has been done? And within the climate space, especially in terms of the shift that we're seeing, there's now AI that can help predict whether your land is going to be fertile in a few years. If you can know that information beforehand, then it's easy for you to say, okay, what crops will I grow here? Or if I'm trying to do a crop rotation, there's a lot more information that can come into play. And this information is very simple. It can come as a text message. It doesn't have to have a whole fancy screen or a smartphone. A text message can simply change the way a farmer does their business. There's also insurance now of agriculture. There's a whole manner of different services that are now coming onto this tech-enabled world that we're seeing in the climate smart agricultural space. And I think that's very exciting.
Professor Alelegn, what I want to ask you is, how can we balance some of the traditional knowledge we have in terms of how to do agriculture and blend that with the modern climate smart solutions that are there as well, to get this blend that is really fit for the continent?
Some of indigenous communities in Ethiopia are just practicing farming rotation and also using irrigations which are just supported with solar panels. So for the sake of just balancing this traditional knowledge with modern energy and climate actions, first we need to just create awareness for those who are using that kind of practice. Some knowledges, in fact, may go against with the current policy, which promotes these renewable energies, and some knowledges are just go in line with this issue. For balancing those which are just against with these modern policies, creating awareness for the communities, as well as having a kind of just trainings and educations in different academic institutions may be just good. That awareness may just help them to know about this modern energy sources.
Fatou, I want to bring you back in. When you spoke about climate smart agriculture, you spoke about one thing that's missing is political will to get this done. I want us to put the shoe on the other foot when you're looking at renewables as well, and look at the youth, women, but specifically youth for this particular question. What do you feel in terms of skills or capacity building that they need to do in order to lead this particular renewable energy workforce? Any skills that are needed? Is there a skill gap that you feel if they filled that, if they got this particular skill set, then we'd definitely be at the front in terms of leading this particular renewable energy change that we're talking about?
Young people are the ones on the ground that have led so much transformation in their communities, from educators, from activists, from campaigners, from innovators. They are everywhere. So in terms of young people leading, they are already leading the charge and the change that we need. And I have mentioned briefly what is actually needed in terms of the level of the government, but also in terms of the level of young people. I mean, capacity building is always important. It's always crucial, because the more you are involved in sectors like this, the more you continue to build your knowledge, so you can continue to bring in more innovative solutions to actually be able to advance progress in the renewable energy sector. So for me, in terms of the skills or the knowledge that we could actually provide young people more with, is obviously how young people could actually effectively maybe harness wind, solar, geothermal, hydro, etc. in a more effective way, especially in how they can use this to create more green job opportunities. Again, young people are already doing that, but to scale it up at a bigger level, at a wider level, so more access to green jobs can actually be available for young people. I think just building the knowledge around how they could really tap into these existing resources, especially on wind and solar, could be really helpful, or it could be one of the things that we actually could do. But also in beyond the level of knowledge or the capacity that needs to be provided, I think we also need to look at this from a holistic approach, because we also need to make sure that in as much as we're talking about providing resources for young people, we also need to make sure that in terms of how our energy or our potential energy and resources we have could be effectively used, is we need to make sure that we are also really looking at the long-term goal, where especially our national and regional policies actually prioritize renewables. Because if we're talking about our policies, we're talking about how we can really implement them without really it prioritizing, or without it really focusing on renewables, as we're also missing a huge opportunity in really how well we are able to harness this particular type of resource that we have.
What can we do as a continent to spur innovation within our own continental border, so as to make sure we're the ones who are coming with these particular innovations, instead of simply importing these solutions onto the continent? What do we need to do to, spur that innovation in Africa?
Yeah, and I think that the energy sector is changing a lot. So before we were talking about a solar panel on a roof powering a house. Now we have cars that have solar panels on them. We used to talk about bikes that are powered by fuel. Now you have battery swapping systems where a bike can come and change the battery in a few matter of seconds. So the whole shift and the innovation around this renewable energy sector is really moving quite a bit. And with the introduction of things like AI, as I mentioned before, mini grids or integrated mini grids, energy storage evolving, green hydrogen. There's a whole manner of different aspects of this that are now going to be quite important for us to start to consider. And so when you now bring in the question of how can we ensure that these innovations are happening in country and not happening as a matter of fact of us buying again, exporting materials and buying back more expensive materials, we need to really involve academia in this and say, how can academia partner with industry to really continue to do R&D? A lot of the Chinese companies, the largest wind and solar companies in the world, are actually investing about 10 to 12% of their profits, not just of their revenues, into R&D, because they realize how important it is to continue to innovate. And even if we do bring manufacturing into Africa, we don't want to start manufacturing legacy technology that is 10 years old when people have moved on to new, faster, better technology. So it's important that we industry partners with academia, that everyone's talking to each other, but also, and as Fatou said, governments need to also take an active role in investing in the research and development, in innovation arms, in universities, in ensuring that students are also doing research on what is the next trends coming up.
When you look at the sector as a whole, for it to be sustainable, there needs to be, room for growth. And I want your input on this as well from the research that you're doing. What sectors beyond energy hold the biggest opportunities, for green growth on the continent? Where are you seeing investors should be coming up? Where should innovation be looking at? Because this is where they can get, the most bang for their buck when it comes to green growth on the continent.
Yeah, apart from this energy sector, there are also other sectors which are just playing their own role in this green growth. For instance, the agricultural sector has its own role. When we just think about the agriculture, in Africa, this agriculture is a dominant economy, but which is mostly affected by climate change. So if you are just innovating a kind of just green technologies which are relating this agriculture, it could just solve half of the problems what we are just talking now. So the agricultural sector, in terms of just making it smart, has to be just taken into consideration apart from this, the energy one. As well, the environment has to be also just taken into consideration.
Fatou, I want to come to you because you have said you've been fortunate enough to be in some of those rooms where negotiation has been taking place. What do you think, and this I know is a big one, so you can give us your experience and what you think some of those insights could work. How do you think Africa should be positioning in itself when it comes to global negotiations, when it comes to issues like climate finance, so it can get its fairness when it comes to climate finance as well? What should the continent be looking at when it gets into these negotiation rooms?
Yes, we have been the continent that continues to be one of the most impacted, even though we are contributing the least to global greenhouse gas emission. But we cannot continue to position ourselves as victims. We also need to position ourselves as a continent that has so much resources where we could actually build solid and long-term partnerships with external partners, where we are not only going to be seen as continents that are actually receiving debt, or a continent that continues to be exploited, but we need to position ourselves as a hub for not only innovation, but also for the energy transition, given the immense resources that we have as a continent, which is not tapped into at all. So as someone that has actually been a negotiator since 2017, mainly following education and also gender-related issues, I've also closely been following conversations around climate financing. And to be honest with you, since Copenhagen, where actually governments committed to the 100 billion climate financing every single year, it's been a challenge because we cannot even achieve the 100 billion climate financing targets, especially by the global north. So it makes me think, especially in relation to the issue of climate financing, how countries, especially those in the global north, are serious about ensuring there is climate financing through adaptation, loss and damage, among others. But most importantly, how long do we continue to push for more action from countries that actually continue to emit the most to the global climate crisis? And this is where Africa comes in and how we position ourselves, because we've been talking about moving and phasing down fossil fuel, which is still a challenge because some countries at some point, I don't want to name names, but we've seen some major economies that have actually said that they are going to phase down fossil fuel or phase out of fossil fuel completely. But now we are seeing them changing the languages in these negotiations, saying now instead of phase down, or they are going to maybe slow down or things like that. So they always use the technicalities or use the terminologies to really be able shift attention and focus on the conversations on things that are most relevant. So I think for me, what I think Africa needs to do first of all is how we position ourselves to attract investors, to attract funding that will actually help us utilize the resources that we have already and be able to help us really be able to upskill our youth demographics so they can access jobs and employment opportunities.
Wangari, I want to bring you in on this as well, because when you look at climate change, it is real. When you look at climate action, it is needed. But when you look at the continent, how does it protect itself from what some are calling green colonialism? Where foreign climate agendas are being brought and being imposed on the continent, because you can see the need, but it's coming, with other strings attached to it. How does the continent protect itself from that, even in the light of the clear action that needs to be taken as well?
I think this is a very key point that we need to start to look at. And even when the narrative around climate change and climate action is brought to Africa, it's told through a lens of somebody else's needs. To give you an idea, when you think of critical minerals, who are they critical to? They're not critical to Africa. We have the minerals. The issue is that the stories are being told by people who are not from the continent. I think this is a big challenge that we're facing. If we want to change how this is perceived, and if we want to change how Africans look at are perceived as the solution rather than the victims, it is a matter of the strategic communications that needs to go into each and every single one of us and the organizations we work for, but also in the way that our presidents and our politicians and our governments tell the stories around renewable energy. I keep saying that if we looked at and we quantified the wealth of renewable energy that Africa has and put a number to that, we would be the richest continent in the world. And if we used that and said, okay, fine, let's borrow against that amount and let's use that as the wealth, instead of saying gold or all these other, let's borrow against the fact that we have 60% of the world's best solar resource. We can power the continent 250 times over with wind alone. We have all the minerals for batteries. We have hydropower. We have geothermal. There is no continent that is as rich as Africa in regard to energy. How do we use that as the benefit to bring in investment into the continent, but also to change the narrative from the victim mentality, as Fatou had said? So it is important that we look at strategic comms, at changing the narrative, and also telling our own stories through our own lenses, talking about the work, especially the local solutions on the ground. If it's mangroves, let's say in Lamu, or if it's a solar farm in Nigeria, we need to start to tell those stories from the community perspectives. And actually, more than that, we need to start telling those stories in our local languages. I want to talk to people in different tribes about solar in their language, not in English, not in a foreign language. Let this also be something that we're talking to communities about in their own language. And I think that's really, really important to change the narrative.
If the continent gets this particular transition right, when you're looking forward, what do you think the continent looks like, in 2030, when you're looking forward to that? That's probably 5 years from now. 2050, when you're looking down the, that particular lens as well. I want to start with you, Prof, on this one. If we do get it right, what are we looking at the continent? What does, the ideal picture look like 5 years from now, or even in 2050? Prof. Ale?
If the government at the African level, African Union and other regional organizations are just elevating, as well as citizens, communities are just working in this, we would be free from just energy poverty in the coming 2050. Then we will also cut emissions as what is provided at global commitments in different Paris agreements, in different conventions. So the emission would be just cut and would be getting or having a kind of just climate finance if the African government are just strong enough. So green jobs would be just created if we can just achieve these climate action programs.
Thank you so much for that as well. Fatou, we want to come to you on this as well. When you think about Clean Earth Gambia, succeeding in its mission 5 years from now and getting that impact that you're talking about, I'm talking about 2030, 5 years from now, or 2050. What does that look like in Africa? And you picture that Africa and you'll be like, yes, we did get it right. What is right?
For me, I would look at it from the economic perspective, especially around jobs. For me, in the next 20, 30 years in Africa, really getting it right, it's actually significant boom in green jobs, where our renewable energy and related industries, especially solar panel installation, wind farms, battery techs and maintenance, etc., will create millions of jobs for the African youth population, and where we will not sit and hear an African youth saying they do not have access to employment because our energy sector has actually created millions of jobs for them. And also just Africa being a hub for green hydrogen, and where we will actually depend, as well as, solar panel manufacturing, etc., where Africa will be a hub for all of that, and we will reduce our dependence on imported technologies, not going to any other countries to actually import this. And most importantly, there will be a higher quality of life, because there will be reduced reliance on dirty energy like diesels, coal, etc. So it would really help to lower the health risks of people in Africa, especially the rates of asthma, lung diseases, and also premature death. But most importantly, all our healthcare systems, our hospitals, our clinics are actually powered by solar, where we wouldn't lose power or due to outage, and we will help save lives. We've known, or I've seen, how so many people, especially African women in labor, lost their lives because of poor electricity or power outrage, and we've seen how so many people could have saved, or their lives could have been saved, if we had resilient healthcare. And these things could actually be made easier when we are a hub for energy, especially renewable energy. So these are the things that I really look forward to in the next 10-20 years, when we are able to achieve this as a continent.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Fatou. Wangari, I want to come to you as well, as we're bringing this to a close. I mean, even as you go around the world and, champion this particular issue of wind energy and coalesce players together, I'm sure there's a vision that keeps you moving, and, this could be what you envision for 2030, 5 years from now, when you're looking at, progress that has been made, and you're looking at the big one, probably even 2050. What is success from your lens looking like when it comes to specifically Africa and this transition as well?
I think for me, this was really outlined well in the Nairobi Declaration, moving renewable energy targets from 56 gigawatts to 300 gigawatts is going to be quite a big feat, but I think it's also a great opportunity. So for me, I do see by 2030 that there will be a lot more wind and solar in our grids. I think also there'll be a lot more discussions around how data and AI are really driving these sectors and are being a core part of this, and being the technology innovation around this is really being embraced by Africans, as we've seen. I think the other thing that's going to be there is that I want to see a lot more processing of our own minerals. So we have a lot of minerals on the continent. Sorry, there's someone here. We have a lot of minerals on the continent, and the minerals on the continent are now just being extracted out. How do we now make sure that those minerals are now being processed within the continent?
As we wrap up this edition of State of Africa, one thing is clear. Africa's just transition is not only about energy. It's about equity, opportunity, and leadership on the global stage. From Ethiopia to the Gambia, from wind power to community-driven adaptation, the solutions are being shaped right here on the continent. A big thank you to my panelists, Wangari Muchiri, Alelegn, and Fatou Jeng, for their insights. And a big thank you for watching as well. I'm Jeff Mote, and this is State of Africa. Until next time, goodbye.